I'm excited to chat for today's podcast. Today's topic's a little heavier, maybe, depending
Yes.
on your perspective, than some of the other topics that we've covered in the past, but I think it's a really important one. We want to talk layoffs today. And,
Yes.
there's a gazillion pieces of advice and articles and things out there in the world right now that aim to help people navigate those moments when they are impacted by layoffs. And some of those things are, really crisp bullet point lists of here's, things you should do. And some of them are a bit more philosophical, but all to say there's a ton of support out there, almost to the point that it makes it hard to know where to even look
Mm,
first.
yeah. Yeah.
So I think today when we talk about this topic, I think it'd be really smart of us to hone in on the moment itself of
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
laid off. Like when, for anyone who's ever been there, that moment of the conversation, the moment, that from that point in time to say 48 hours after that, what can you really do in that first 2 days to give yourself the grace that you deserve to experience in full what just
Hmm.
happened, but
Hmm.
also set yourself up as best you can for success going forward, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's a very um important time frame, and
Hmm.
one that a lot of people understandably feel a little paralyzed in those moments, like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
what do
big,
I do?
yeah. It's a huge moment. And I think,
Um,
this is part of many moments in a career, where you may be, tossed back or, but it's hard to talk about career, or we can't really talk about careers if we don't talk about layoffs, right? I mean, because it is part of it. So I think this is a great topic. I love this being the first 48 and I think people can leave this with almost like a blueprint, as they kind of think about this, whether it's your first time being, laid off or multiple times, and you kind of like, how could I done it different? I think hopefully folks come out of this with something that's almost reusable, right? So awesome. Let's
yeah,
hop in.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
sorry. Yeah.
think, yeah, one very micro thing right before we hop in. I like that idea of reusable, right? Because a layoff is a super crummy moment in time. If you've ever lived
Mhm.
through it, it's very formative. It sucks. There's no other way to describe it. It's
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
horrible. And too many
Yeah.
companies do it too often, in my opinion. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
The thing that I think we can all take away from this conversation, hopefully, will be, look, there are going to be moments in our career that are outside of the realm of our control. Things will happen to
Yep.
us that we do not choose. Sometimes that's
Yep.
a layoff. Sometimes that's getting, fired just as an individual. Sometimes that's something completely unrelated. Like
Mhm.
many companies went under during the pandemic, like
Yeah. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
zillion versions of something happening to you that is outside of the realm of your control.
Yep.
And how do you react in that moment to
Mhm.
best serve your future self is what we want people to take away from this conversation. We're
Yep.
going to keep it in the lens of layoffs, but everything we share today is super transferable and can be applied to
Mhm.
any moment like that in your career.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. And we like frameworks, right? So this will
I
help give them a
we
framework. Another framework.
we do. We love a good alliteration too. I think,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
today's it's almost like there's kind of three things I think we'd want to talk about in the first 48 hours after someone was
Mhm.
impacted by a layoff. We can work through these each one on one, but in my mind, it's the tactical things that you need to do right
Mhm.
away.
Mhm. Yep. Yep.
The tone setting things, like, okay, what decisions and actions can I do to put me on the right trajectory coming out of this moment in time?
Yep.
And then there's probably this third piece, which is also somewhat tactical. It's like a tactical sandwich almost, which
Yeah.
is what can you do today to get ahead of
Yeah.
if that were to ever happen to you in the future. So
Yep. Yep.
tactical
I love
tone
it.
setting, to dos
To
for
do's.
today.
I like it. I like it.
Gotta
I
let it
feel
be.
like what I love about this is I think the not to speak broadly, but I think the majority of folks just really think, tactical in this. But this tone setting piece, I think folks will really, I think, be a little bit surprised about, but I think we'll also find a lot of value in this. So what are the tactical things, Shelby, that folks should think about in 48 hours? Yeah, what's
Yeah.
on what are the things you're kind of sharing with folks? Because typically we do see folks within their first 48 hours, I think, in some cases, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Totally. Um, I think on the whole, the blanket advice that I would give to folks if they had just had a conversation and they were let go is to press pause and know that your
Yes.
body, your mind and your body is in a massive fight or flight state, right? You
Mhm.
are stressed, you are super nervous, you may or may not know which way is up. You're thinking
Mhm.
about 10 million things at once. You feel completely flustered. You could be pissed off, rightfully so. You could be the full suite of emotions.
Yep. Yep. For sure.
And what do we know about feeling all of those things at the same time is that our clear and level-headed decision making capability is
That's so
not
good.
yeah,
That's so good.
it's not functioning at its fullest
Yeah.
capacity.
Yeah.
So I always tell folks, when you're having, if you're in that moment, don't sign anything in the room. You are
Mm.
not required to sign any agreement, any document, anything in that room. So just don't.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just a bad 9 times out of 10. There's either something more you can get out of it, or, there's things written into these agreements that you need to be really thoughtful and mindful about.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's just, and there's no incentive for you. There's absolutely no upside for you signing in the moment,
Yep. Yep.
especially if you're in a protected class of any kind. So if you're over
Mhm.
40 or have any sort of disability, or, were recently on any sort of leave for FMLA or
Mhm.
anything of that nature, it's
Mhm.
always press pause, don't sign anything, say thank you for the documents, and go
Yep.
review them on your own time, and then get support to review those things,
Yes.
especially if you feel like you have a case or a potential case for anything.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, we have been conditioned to, not ruffle feathers and not
Mhm.
be a pain in the ass, and
Mhm. Yeah.
we've been conditioned to kind of subdue ourselves in a lot of moments like this in our career. And this is one of those moments where you need to be deeply selfish and you need to be fiercely protective of yourself. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if it makes you uncomfortable, this
Yeah.
is a moment where you have to dig deep and protect and advocate for yourself first and foremost. And the
Yeah.
number one thing you can do is do not sign anything in the moment. Give yourself some time to take all that info, go get it
Mhm.
sussed and vetted if needed.
Yeah. I love this tip because, I remember the first time, being in a people space, and you spent more time in it than I have, I'm sure, but the first visibility into just seeing folks really pushing back in these moments, like I realized, like, we have a right, like we don't, and the contrast between those and those who just, signed and moved on. I mean, sure, like, that tension's real, but it isn't, we have a right to do that. And I think more folks who are been through this process, they kind of know that they've been burnt once, or they've been like, you know what, I'm gonna do this a little bit different this time. And they will, like you said, they will definitely, they're very comfortable with saying, hey, not right now, let me do my work, I'll be in touch, and we'll kind of work through this. So I'll just say it happens more often than not, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't feel weird if you are that person, because it is common for
Yeah.
folks to not sign in the room and to push back. So
Yeah, totally, totally.
Awesome.
I think the second thing that I'll say in terms of tactical guidance, what to do live in the moment, is if you are ticked off, if you find yourself to be like angry, or like you find that, you're like, oh my, I just want to scream, like how could they haven't supported, for whatever reason, all which I guarantee are super valid and justified and all the things. I do think that it's really pretty rare for getting angry, or not getting, you're allowed to be angry, of course, but letting that anger take over your persona live in the room and
Mm.
unloading it on the people delivering the news very rarely works in your favor.
I
So,
think that's a great tip. Yeah. Yeah.
so look, like I get it. Like you probably, like if you're ticked, you have a right to be. But
Mhm.
I think in that moment, digging deep and using everything in your power to hold on to that feeling and channel it into something productive. Again, like if you feel like you have a case, or if you have,
Mhm.
you know, if you feel like
Mhm.
there's something that you'd want to negotiate, channeling all that energy into a productive avenue, and
Mhm.
then bringing that back to the conversation either through a lawyer or just through yourself. But once you've had a moment
Yeah.
to breathe, um, goes a long way, because
Yeah.
it's hard, like, right, like whoever's delivering the news, the likelihood that they work with you day to day is low, unfortunately. I just see it far
Yep.
too often. These are just,
Yep.
random people from some external company, or someone from the HR team that you've never met before, whatever it may, or your boss 4 layers up who you've never had a
Yep.
one-on-one conversation with, right?
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
people live in the room are not going to be able to change what's written in this agreement or anything like that, right? So
Mhm. Mhm.
unloading, dumping, doing all these things in that live in that moment very rarely serves you. So be very mindful and careful not to.
I I think that's definitely a great tip, because we see a lot of people right now who are airing stuff out there, and I think to each their own, but it is important to realize that in this moment, your relationship's about to shift, right? This is where a lot of companies are like, oh, we don't like to use the word like we're a family, right? Because at some point, if you're sitting in this moment, it has shifted, right? For better or worse. And the folks who are giving you this news, they've gone through a lot of training. They've gone through a lot of in some cases practice runs to really make sure that they say the right things at the right times, and that they keep their emotions together, you
Mhm.
know, just as, oh, you should, right? Because of all of the optics and things that can come from this moment after we close Zoom, or we, leave the room. So I do think that's a great tip. Um, that, may be hard to do in the moment, but
Mhm.
it really is, it's an important moment, I think,
Yeah,
in all this. So
totally.
to protect yourself, right? Just as though they're doing the same thing, right? So
Yeah.
um, and to give you a chance to advocate for what you need down the road.
Yeah.
Are there any other tacticals here, Shelby, or anything else to add to that point?
I mean, I think in the grand scheme of the gazillions of conversations I've had with folks who have been impacted by this, and articles I've read, and all the advice that I've seen out in the wild, I mean, I think those are really the kind of two biggest ones: is
Mm.
take a beat, don't do anything in the
Yep.
moment.
Yep.
You'll be better for it. And two, just remember that the likelihood of anything changing live in that room is slim to none. So
Yep.
don't let your emotions like overpower that moment. Just
Yep. Yep.
get the information that you need,
Yep.
walk out of that conversation. That doesn't mean that your feelings aren't valid. They are. You're allowed to
Yep.
be
Yep.
pissed. You're allowed to do all those things. But in
Mhm.
that room, in that moment, is likely not the most
Mhm.
productive place for you to channel that energy. So those would be
Yep.
my two big ones for like in moment.
Yeah. I I think that's great. I think those are great ones, and often not talked about. So tacticals are out of the way. So I've gone through this process. I'm like, okay, I have what I need. I'm, I've witnessed some really just they're just locked in my mind of people just leaving the offices with boxes. And that was back in the before the remote world, and you live in that moment, right? And you get out of the you get home, or you're in the car, like, what's next? Like, what's next? I have what I need from this moment. um what about those tone setting things
Yeah.
that someone can do in 48 hours?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the high level, like we were saying earlier, there's going to be moments in everyone's career where things happen to you that are out of your control.
Hmm.
It's just a
Yep.
fact, right?
Yep.
But
Life.
what do we need as humans? We thrive when we feel autonomy and when we feel in control of our own destiny and of
Hmm.
our own
Hmm.
lives and our own realities. And
Hmm.
so, in moments like this, where something happens that is exceptionally impactful, like losing your job,
Yep.
that you did not control, you did not make that decision, what can you do to get yourself back to a place of feeling in control sooner rather than
Hmm.
later?
Hmm.
I think that's what we mean by tone setting. So, like in this first
Yeah.
48 hours, what's the likelihood that you're gonna like find your next gig,
Yeah.
have your insurance covered, like
Yeah.
have zero lapse in paycheck and all of that, and then it's just going to be buttoned up and like you'll be ready to rock?
Yep. Yeah.
Even the most prepared person on planet Earth, the likelihood of that happening is slim to none. What
Yep.
you can do is lean into, um, I don't want to call them like pithy experiences or exaggerated experiences, but in the context of a moment that's so jarring, like, oh my God, I just
Hmm.
lost my job,
Hmm. Hmm.
leaning into it and setting the tone in something you can control that is almost just as exaggerated can really help get you on the right trajectory as time passes. So,
Yep.
technical example, I won't get too much into the brain science, but there's a bunch of stuff out there that talks about how our our memories of events actually continue to shape our recollection of said event. And as time goes on, how we look back at a moment is actually more impactful than the experience we had in the moment itself. So let's fast forward 10 years. Let's use a really exaggerated example. I just got laid off. Oh my gosh, was not seeing that coming. It's a Friday. I I literally don't know which way is up. What the heck just happened to me? What I'm panicking. What do I do?
Hmm.
Right. If I go home, completely panic, hunker down, become a hermit, and don't leave my house for 2 days because I have no idea what to do. In 10 years, when I look back on that moment, the defining part of that 48 hours will be the moment I lost my job.
Hmm.
Now imagine I do something just as exaggerated. I just lost my job. Oh my God, did not see that coming, never expected that. Maybe instead of hermiting, I do something like, you know, there's a top-notch Michelin star steakhouse down the
Hmm.
road.
Hmm.
I'm gonna go get a cocktail with my partner and order $100 caviar that I've
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
ordered. Can I do that forever? No, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in this moment, can I do something so out of my norm? Maybe it's caviar. Maybe it's, you know, doing something wild like skydiving. Maybe it's, you know, just getting in the car and just driving somewhere and seeing, just
Yeah.
doing something that is so distinctly different than your norm
Yeah.
as a way to counterbalance this other thing that was so unexpected will give you something else to anchor on as time passes and you can look back on that moment. And
Yeah.
you're going to want to forget the moment that you got let go, but in 10 years you're like, yeah, remember that moment? Like remember that time we randomly went to that steakhouse and
Hmm.
got
Yeah.
that $100 caviar? Like super random, can't afford that every
Yeah.
day, but it was fun that one time. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what we mean by tone setting. Like, what are things that you can do in the moment to take back a sense of control of that time. Does it make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it totally. And I actually know peers who've actually done that, right?
Oh,
It's just,
really? Yeah,
and
totally.
what's funny about that is, talking about it, it's literally they get it, they chuckle about it, right? Because it's like so wild and random, but like, but I think what's important is, like you said, you can't, as the saying goes, you can't control the thing, that has kind of come through, but you can control how you respond to it,
Mhm.
right? And we're not saying that you shouldn't go through, the various stages of change and, like, have a moment, be angry, be frustrated and all that stuff. And but to ignore and or to just stay in that and not give yourself that permission and that time to say, you know what, that happened. I'm going to be all right. And I'm going
Mhm.
to be okay. And I'm going to show myself that I'm going to be okay, because I'm going to go and have this moment with my partner or with whatever. I'm going to go down the road and have some drinks with my friends.
Mhm.
It shows you and that you have this.
Mhm.
Like, this didn't happen to you, it happened to you, but it didn't define you, right? So I think it's important. I think it's
Mhm.
incredibly important, like you said, to hit that pause button, but also to, like, sit there for a little bit and reflect and look forward. And, like, and the greatest, I mean, best place to do that is over some great food. So I'm all about tone setting for the future.
Yeah. I mean, another silly example that might resonate for some of the folks listening, and just in the spirit of kind of getting our imaginations rolling about what types of things could be tone setting activities. I remember this was 20 plus years ago at this point. I was dating a guy in high school, great guy, for a million reasons, and was having his family was hosting this party. And I wanted to bring dessert. That was going to be my contribution. So I made these beautiful cupcakes. I made the exact amount of cupcakes for the number of people who were going to be at this party, and each one was different. I took a ton of time and care. This was like a little
Mhm.
business that I ran, so I had a very
Hmm.
strong sense of
Interesting.
identity, not
Yeah.
dissimilar to a job, right? Like,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
when I was 16 years old, like this really, really mattered to me. And
Yeah.
it was a reflection of myself. And was super proud of them, felt really good. I get in my car, my Volkswagen Jetta, which I paid for myself, and I was like,
That's awesome.
I'm awesome. Like, it was great. Everybody's gonna love them. And I'm on the freeway, and some doofus like cuts me off, and I have to hit my brakes a bit harder than
Oh
I
no.
really would have. And the
Yeah.
front row of cupcakes that are sitting on the cookie sheet on the floor of the passenger side of my car fly forward. And you know, they're
Nice. Yeah.
ruined.
Yeah.
I obviously continue driving. I pull up in front of my boyfriend's house, and I just sit there, just trying to like collect myself. I'm pissed, I'm sad, I'm all of these things. I'm 16, so in hindsight,
Yeah.
this would not ruin my day like it did back then, but in that moment, it mattered.
That's a big moment. That's a big
Totally.
moment. Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure. And
Yep.
a bunch of these people that were going to be there, I'd never met before, and so it
Mm.
was very much like there was a lot baked into this for me. And he calls my cell phone, and he says, he's like, "You've been sitting outside for like 5 minutes." His window looked out to the front of the house. He's like,
Mm.
why aren't you coming inside?" And I was like, "The cupcakes." Thanks. He's like,
This
"I'll be
feels like
right
a
there.
movie.
I'll be right there." This is a 100% true story. 100%.
Yeah.
He comes out, he looks at the cupcakes. He's like, "Okay, like it's all good. I don't need to eat my cupcake, like you don't need to eat
Yeah.
your cupcake, and my dad doesn't eat. We'll be fine." And I'm just like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it's not whatever." This is a tone setting moment, right? If
Mm.
we had just walked into the house, that would be my recollection of the moment, right? I don't even know if I would
Mm.
remember the moment, to be honest with you. Like at this point, I don't know
Mm.
if I would ever be talking about the cupcakes 20 years later.
Yep.
He took one of the cupcakes that had fell forward and was smeared in my passenger seat, totally trash. You would never eat it because it's got like little rocks and dirt and stuff
Yeah.
in it.
Yeah. The floor of a Jetta all over
Exactly.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
He's
not
yummy.
edible. He gives it to me. We're standing in the street in front of his house. He puts the cupcake in my hand. He says, smush it in my face.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
I was like, at first I didn't bite. I was like, what? You're not taking this seriously. Like, I'm really upset about this. And he's like, I
Hmm.
believe you. And I also know that you're going to feel better if you smush this in my face.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
I did. I took the cup
Yeah.
and I smushed it. And then I like smeared it in,
That's amazing.
like really got it in there.
Like all those feelings are just like coming out, and
All
yeah,
projected right onto his face, like
yeah,
innocent bystander who was willing to
yeah,
take one
yeah,
for the team. And he wasn't wrong. Like I felt in that moment a small sense of regained control. I'll
yeah,
admit it was kind of satisfying.
yeah,
Smushing a
yeah.
cupcake in someone's face.
This thing you worked on so
Yes.
hard, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
20 years later, I look at that moment and think, yeah, that felt really big and that felt
Hmm.
like crummy and hard in that moment. I was really excited for that. I worked really hard for it. I wanted it to be an important moment, blah, 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 blah. And yet, like, I got through it because of that tone setting thing,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's what we mean when we say, like, in that first 48 hours, after something that you can't control happens to you, what is something just as exaggerated that you wouldn't do in your
Hmm.
normal life? I don't go around smushing cupcakes in people's faces. Like it's not on my normal repertoire of things to do.
I
But
love
like
that.
what is that version
Yeah,
for people, you know?
yeah. And I love it, right? Because the tone that typically happens after a layoff is like, oh no,
Yeah.
I'm never gonna find another job. I'm not gonna be able to do this. And like my life is, you know, changing, and life before, life after, and oh my gosh, I don't know how long this is gonna last. All those are like valid, like those feelings, like, and I think it's important, like you said earlier in the tacticals, like those feelings are real, and you're allowed to have, but you also like, no, like you're like do something that just kind of shifts that narrative for yourself,
Yeah.
because you don't want to be in that too long, right? And those, you want to get through it, you want to get back in control. And I think that looks different to other people, but I think when we think through what are those things, like once you've gained that tone, or you've set the tone, then what, right? So like what does that next piece look like in the next 40 hours? And I think it's getting it's getting to work, right, in a productive way, right? If
Yeah.
that means getting on the phone, doing the things you need to do to make sure that your four walls or whatever, the things that needed to protect yourself are kind of there. Like if that means, okay, I got to transfer this, got to transfer that, 4K, 401K, all that stuff is, we won't get into all that because that's pretty tactical things, but there's other things to start to gain control. And I think that's you know, the going back to the know yourself philosophies. It's like, this is when that stuff becomes important.
Mhm.
You've set the tone, you're now in control. You sit down on a Monday and you start that plan,
Mhm.
right? You either dust it off, right? Or if we've talked about this, like the importance of revisiting your career, playbook or plan, however you want to call it,
Mhm.
on a regular basis, or for moments like that when you're caught off guard, you go, huh, I'll be all right. I've been
Mhm.
doing this work all along. It's not, I just have to put the plan in action. So
Mhm.
let's talk about that. To dos today for someone who, let's say, we are recording this on a Friday, let's say over the next 48 hours, what are they, what are the to dos that they should be doing? Or what should somebody be doing if they haven't done this work, or they need to do this work to be ready for the next, or their first potential layoff, or the next one? Who knows? What are those?
Yeah, I mean, I think step one is, and I don't mean this to be like doomsday or morbid or anything at all, but like when people are afraid of things, and I think we all probably generally share fear, at least some degree of fear of being impacted by a layoff, which is
Oh
a
yeah,
normal
for sure.
sensation
Yep.
to feel.
Yeah.
The thing that we're really afraid of is not the thing itself. We're not actually afraid of being laid off. We're afraid of what happens when that happens. We're afraid of like not knowing when it might happen or how it might happen or
Mm-hmm.
what the outcome of it will be or how I'll recover, right? And
Yep.
we're
Yep.
afraid of the peripheral things around it. And so the quickest, easiest way to start to diffuse some of that fear is to, again, not in a doomsday way, but just in a proactive, healthy way, is to imagine it and to think about it. Like, hey,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if that actually happened to me right now, like what would I do?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
pregame your cupcake moment, right?
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
something that I've always wanted to do that I've just never really made time for myself for?
Mm-hmm.
What would I do if I suddenly found myself, having some free
Yep.
time on a Friday
Yeah.
afternoon that I unexpectedly came across?
Yep.
Would I go skydiving? Would I paint my living room purple? Like, would
Yeah.
I smush a cupcake in my partner's face? Would I let my kid smush a cupcake in my face to
Yeah.
just hear
Yeah.
them laugh? What thinking about those things proactively diffuses the
Mhm. The
angst.
mat the that magnitude. Like I
Yeah.
love that. I've often done this for like worst case scenarios. Like, okay, if I lost my like what like and you when you go through that exercise, you just keep kind of peeling those layers back. You're like, if like being not having like losing your house or all these things, if those are like, the typical like, what if I never find a job and I'm homeless, like those like if you really go through this exercise and peel all this back, like
Mhm.
a long like you have a lot of steps and things along the way before you end up in the thing in your head that you've built up to be so big, right? Like likely have a severance, likely have things, you have the option to get insurance various different ways, right? You have a lot of stuff here
Mhm.
to kind of leverage before the worst scenario
Mhm.
comes into play for you. Like, oh my God, what if I never get the job? Like, or be able to work for a company like this? Well, that that may or may not be true, but you will find a job. It may not be the one that, you know, is where you'll be in the next 5, but it will be there. Like you'll find something for yourself, and then you can rebuild it. But yeah, you going through that exercise of working through and peeling those layers back, I think is very healthy. It keeps you from panic applying, which and just reacting. And like we said earlier, you have to hit the pause button. And if you can prepare yourself and say, I'm gonna be all right, I've set my tone. I've went through this, I've practiced this scenario multiple times in my head, right? Because you know, this is the moment now where you're putting your contingencies and your plan in action. And part of that is you've rehearsed it, like you've rehearsed the scenario. You've already had a conversation, hopefully with your partner, about like, if this happens, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna, you know, cut back on this or cut back on that or whatever, but you're not in panic mode, you
Yeah.
know.
I think
You're in
that's a
control.
great frame, right? Like this idea of practice. And that's something that I think
Yeah.
people absolutely should be doing today. Practice picking your tone setting moment,
Mhm.
practice the conversations that you would need to have,
Mhm.
practice all those things. We do that in every other facet of our lives, right?
Yep. Yep.
Athletes practice how to fall without breaking bones,
Yep.
and
Yep.
doctors practice how to handle emergency situations, and PR
Hmm.
people have
Yeah.
things written if, hopefully it would never happen, but like the leadership team, something happened,
Yep. Yeah. Oh,
whatever it may
absolutely.
be,
Yeah.
they do these things, they practice these things with the hope that they never have to use them, but they still do it. The
Yep. Yep.
preparedness is the
Yep.
thing that gets them through those moments. This is no different. And on the whole, we don't do that level of practice
We
the way
don't.
that
We don't.
we should.
And this is where our mission and our vision of like helping people feel like they're in control over their. This is a very good example of that,
Yeah.
right? Like these moments, like you mentioned, that are going to set you back are going to happen,
Yeah. They're
but
gonna happen to you, but
they're going
they aren't you.
they aren't you. And
Yeah.
if you can like practice that scenario, you can, all right, put that plan in action, you know, dust off your playbook or know yourself story and say, okay, what do I need to adjust? Like, how do I need to like, you know, weave in what I just did over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, and like adjust. Like this is more than just like, okay, let me pull my resume out. And hopefully if you're doing it right, you're kind of already been keeping this stuff up to date, right? Like you've already been capturing those,
Mhm.
wins from the company that you can just like, okay, and you could spend maybe 40 minutes to an hour just kind of getting everything kind of in place and reaching out to your network, saying, hey, this happened. Again, it doesn't define me.
Mhm.
I'm ready to rock and roll. Let's have some coffee next week. We just had an episode on networking, right? Like
Mhm.
this is that moment. You've been working on your network. You've been like keeping that fresh. It's not like you reached out to somebody, that you haven't talked to in 20 years and like, hey,
Mhm.
like all of this stuff is working together. I don't want to say for this moment, as a way to like, but it is for these moments,
Oh,
right? To to
oh,
to to move to move forward, to lean on your network and to, you know, like I said, you dusted your stuff off, but it's not you're not looking for it. You know where it's at. It's stashed in a place that is accessible and you're ready to go, and it doesn't change the sense of like, hey, this just happened and man, this just kind of sucks, because life before was this. We may have to change our vacation plans, or we have this thing, or we have like we've got to make some adjustments here. But again, those adjustments were sort of already in play. You've already rehearsed it, and now you just kind of you get to work, but in a productive way that moves you forward. It's not just contributing. We
for the
hear this a lot. It's
yeah.
just there's so much chaos out there right now, and you don't want to contribute to that, right? You actually want to be like, look, I'm in control of this moment, and I can, and that shows up. That tone that we talked about in tone setting, it shows up. I see people who are like, hey, this happened. They reach out to me. Their tone is very different than, because they did that work. They're like, I'm ready to go. And look, I'm moving forth and this happened. But versus some people who like their tone is very like, I don't know what to do. And,
Mhm.
woe is me. And I'm not using that as a negative, but it's like, I've seen the difference
Mhm.
that in terms of when they get hired, where they get hired,
Mhm.
because of that tone setting. So I think these three things personally, Shelby, I think are different than what you typically hear, I mean, like you said, the tacticals, obviously there's other things that to do that people need to do that are unique to them, but I think sharing that, you hit the pause button, really think about that moment when you're sitting in the room and how you show up in that so that it doesn't come back to get you.
Mhm.
Um, the tone setting techniques. Hey, we learned something fun about cupcakes. Well, I don't want to put you in the spot, but I would love the name of what your cupcake business was.
I didn't have a name, funny enough.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
um, and then, some of these things to do, like we said, you should constantly be working on this stuff. Like it's, it's not about, you know, if, it's more like when, and, it's important to just to never be caught off guard. And we say that all the time,
Yeah.
right? So I love it. What else you got?
I think that's a good moment to kind of wrap this one up. I think I would echo everything you just said. If anyone listening to this is feeling like either was recently impacted or at any point
Mhm.
impacted or
Yep.
feels like, reading between the tea leaves and something just doesn't quite feel right at my company, trust your gut in those moments, start to do the
Yeah.
work now, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
to get ahead of this stuff and
Yeah.
don't let
Yeah.
it happens and it can happen to you, but it doesn't define you and it's not
Yeah. Yeah.
you.
And I would say, like, we say this with every episode, but this is the work we're doing on a very regular basis with people, right? Like we're either helping them, transition, literally because the great, companies that we get to work with have set up our services for them to help folks get back on their feet quicker. But it's also people who are kind of stuck in this. They're like, we think this is going to happen. I don't know. I kind of want to like be ahead of it. So, this topic out of all the things we kind of talk about is one that like we're actively working with people on almost a daily basis. So, this is the call to say like, don't be shy
Yeah.
and reach out, share your thoughts, share where you're at, and there's a good chance we can get you pointed in the right direction relatively quickly. So
Yeah.
awesome. Cool.
Awesome.
Great
Well,
stuff.
thank you, Dennis. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. We will catch you at the next episode.
Awesome.
See ya.
Later.